was as much as I could do not to dance. Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. My name is Ros Woodward, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a worship associate here, a volunteer who helps lead the worship services with our ministers. Today, I'm joined by one of our co-senior ministers, Reverend Kelly Asprooth-Jackson, and by the worship team of Linda Warren, Steve Gregorius, and Dan Carnes. A thank you to all those volunteering in the many roles today: greeters, ushers, hospitality providers, lay ministers, and sound technicians. At First Unitarian Society, we question boldly, listen humbly, grow spiritually, and act courageously, and love unapologetically. If you're visiting us today, we welcome you. We're very glad to see you here with us. If you'd like more information about First Unitarian Society, please stop by the welcome table located in the Commons just outside the door to the left. We hope you'll be able to stay and join us for coffee immediately after the service, also in the Commons. For those connecting with us virtually today, we're glad you're with us too. And we hope you'll be able to take a moment to watch the announcement slides after today's service to learn about upcoming programs and activities. Our flowers this morning come from the wedding of Brian Rainey and Levi Bird, who were married yesterday in the Landmark Auditorium. And now, I invite you to join me in a moment of silence to center ourselves and bring ourselves fully into this time as we join together again in community. We gather in community to rest from our labors, to greet our neighbors, and to open our being to insight and intuition of that greater reality of which we are part.
We enter this sanctuary for kindness and comfort. May rough-worn hands and aching backs be healed.
May we find in our time together inspiration and renewal.
We enter this sanctuary of hope for equality. May those who labor to survive live to know justice.
May we touch the holy in each other and be touched by the graciousness of life.
We enter this sanctuary of love and vocation. May our bonds of solidarity be strengthened.
May we find here a calm peacefulness that will carry us through the days ahead.
We enter this sanctuary of courage and friendship. May we proceed hand in hand toward freedom.
Amen.
Now I invite you to rise in all the ways that we do, and to join me in the words of aspiration for the kindling of our chalice flame. In recognition of Labor Day, we light this flame to honor all work, including the work of our hands and our backs, in gratitude for all the labors that support our work, and for all those who boldly continue the work of justice, equity, and peace. And now I invite you to reach out to those around you and greet each other with signs of love and peace.
It was as much as I could do not to
let's join together in singing our opening hymn, number 1024 in the Teal hymnal, When the Spirit Says Do. Forward if you like to. You're also allowed to sit where you are, no pressure. Well, hi. How are you doing? The story that I have for you today is one of those stories. I don't know if you know any stories like this. It's one of those stories that's told a lot of different ways by a lot of different people. So you'll hear it one way with one set of characters, you'll hear it another way with another set of characters, but it always seems like it's kind of the same basic story. Can you think of any stories that are like that? Oh, yes, please. Greek mythology. Well, sure, we got how there are Greek names for the gods, and then there are Roman names for the same characters, and sometimes there are slight variations in the stories. I think that's a great example. Yes, the labors of Hercules, absolutely. Absolutely. So, this story has a version in Judaism, it has a version in Christianity, it has a version in Islam, it even has a version that is a Japanese folktale. I happen to know the Muslim version best, so that is the version I'm going to tell you. So if you don't already know, the person who is like the central prophet, the central leading figure in the Muslim religion, in Islam, that is the name, right? So Islam is the term for the religion, Muslim is the term for someone who practices that religion. This central figure is named Muhammad. He's a person who lived a long time ago. He lived in a city called Mecca, which is in what is today Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. And in his understanding, in the understanding of Islam, he was a prophet. He was a person who had profound religious inspiration. He brought a new message to people about how they should live, what they should do, how they should treat one another. And a lot of the people that lived in the same city as him, in the city of Mecca, did not like his message. In particular, the rich people who lived in the city of Mecca didn't like the part of his message that said the rich people should use their money to help take care of the poor. That was a very unpopular position with the rich people. Eventually, the unpopularity among some, he had a lot of followers, but there were people in the city who didn't like him, meant that he needed to get out of town. And he needed to get out of town real fast because there were some people who were looking for him. So he and his very close friend, Abu Bakr, Muhammad and Abu Bakr, they ran out of town in the dead of night so no one would see them leaving, and they were going to another place, going to another city a ways away called Medina. And it was a long enough journey they couldn't make it all in one night, so they had to stop and find a place to rest, and the place that they found to rest in the middle of the night was a cave. So they're hiding out in this cave, hoping that nobody finds them, trying to make it to the city of Medina where they hopefully will be safe. And unfortunately, the people who were looking for Muhammad, they found their way up into the hills to where he was hiding. They didn't know exactly where, but they had a sense, okay, he's probably going this way. We think he's going to Medina. This is the pathway. They were looking for him. He and Abu Bakr, they're hanging out in the cave. They're in a lot of trouble. This is where the spider enters the story. How do you feel about spiders? Yes. Great. Okay. Highly positive. Yes. You have some tarantulas, so maybe even more positive. Yes. Great and scary at the same time. Okay, there's a tension there. Yes. Okay, fun to look at, but maybe you want some distance, maybe some glass in between. Yep. Is that your spider? Oh. Okay, I'm very sorry to hear. Oh, from your class. You had a class that had pet tarantula. Oh, okay. Well, it's a pretty pro-spider crowd this morning, which is great. It is, however, the case that there are some people who are not very fond of spiders. That's okay, too. So, Muhammad and Abu Bakr, they're in this cave, and there's a spider there. And a lot of people would not be excited about the fact there was a spider in the cave with them. But this spider was doing something very important. It was weaving its web, right? Tracing out thread back and forth, up and down, making a net with it to catch insects, to eat, but also making something over the mouth of the cave. And this is where the sort of marvelous quality of the story comes in. The spider wove that web so quickly and so thoroughly that by the time the people who were looking for Muhammad arrived at the mouth of the cave, they said, well, that can't be in there. There's a whole thick, big spider web over the mouth of that cave. Must have been nobody in there for years and years and years. We'll just keep looking. And so in this way, Muhammad and Abu Bakr were able to escape from the people that were chasing them and make their way to safety in Medina. Now, here is the moral that I take from this story. That there are things in this world, maybe even people in this world, who we don't necessarily appreciate. Maybe we don't want to be near. But sometimes their work, their labor, the thing that they do with their life is so incredibly important that there's nothing in the world we would be more grateful for than to have them with us in an emergency. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And now I'm going to send you forth to summer fun or wherever it is that you are going next. And while the children are traveling to their appointed places, we're going to sing again. We're going to sing hymn number 157 in your silver and gray hymnals. That's Step by Step, the longest march. It's real short, and I like it a lot. So let's sing it through twice, okay? 157, Step by Step.
This is from Annie Dillard. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. I was waiting for my chalupa in the drive-thru when I saw a sign on the back door. An open metal door with a small window in the middle and a yellow sign on the inside that reads, "Danger. Never open this door after dark. Always look before you open this door. Your life could depend on it." Exclamation mark. The same text is also printed smaller in Spanish. She's got it written bigger. Danger. Never open this door after dark. Always look before you open this door. Your life could depend on it. One of my first jobs was at Wendy's, and I remember having to watch the video about what to do in an armed robbery situation. We were taught where the escape hatch was on the inside of the walk-in freezer. This inadvertently made armed robbery seem like the more attractive career path. Certainly, it seemed more profitable, but had all things been equal, I'd still rather be on the outside of the freezer than in it. Nobody should die at their job, but it seemed especially crummy to be risking my life for, at the time, $6.35 an hour. It was tiring and hectic work, and it came with duties I would have never imagined before working there. Sometimes, giant tropical spiders would jump out of their crates of potatoes. Once, it was a scorpion. Whose job was that to catch the scorpion? I worked with a married couple who had immigrated from Iraq and who had 3 small children at home. In their old country, she'd been a doctor. He'd been an engineer. I still think of them whenever I hear the argument that if unskilled workers want to get paid more, they should get an education and find a better job. The back door at the Taco Bell reminded me once again that there is no such thing as unskilled labor, and everyone who works behind a cash register or flat top or fryer deserves to be paid well for the work they do. The hours and days of a human life have value beyond measure.
In the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis, near the very beginning of the Hebrew Bible, we come to the conclusion of the story of creation. Well, the second story of creation. Genesis has 2 in just those first few chapters, but I'm talking about the second one, the one with Adam and Eve in it. I think that you know the gist of the story. The garden, the snake, the apple. Well, not always an apple. The original story just says that the forbidden thing is a fruit of some kind. Apple is just the most common interpretation in the Christian West. In both Judaism and Islam, a grape is probably the most popularly associated with the story. Although if you follow certain authorities, including Michelangelo's depiction of the tale on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, then it's a fig. But in any case, this is the story of the fall. God creates paradise. God creates humans. God says, don't do this one thing. Humans do that one thing anyway. God throws the human beings out of paradise, and at the end of all that, there are a set of curses pronounced by the divine on the other characters of the story. The last of these is as follows. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. The series of curses towards the end of this chapter seem to provide explanations for why things are the way that they already are in the world, a common purpose behind mythic stories from any and every culture. The other ones explain things like why snakes crawl on the ground and why childbirth can be such a painful and incredibly physically demanding experience. This one seems to be the explanation for why human beings have to work in order to eat. Why food does not simply provide itself to us through no effort or energy on our parts. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. This would have matched with the stark reality of the people who first told this story, and with those who retold it before eventually writing it down, as well as that of nearly every other grouping of humanity, as far as we know. Up until very recently, every human society has needed most of its members to spend much of their time working to produce food. Whether by hunting or foraging or through agriculture, whether by the spear or the plow, the cooking fire or the mortar and pestle, a very large amount of the work of human history has been about keeping people fed. It's really only in the last few hundred years, and especially the last 100, that advances in agriculture have allowed for a world in which food is no longer the primary purpose of human labor. So that today, here in the United States, the entire food system, from farm laborers all the way to restaurant waitstaff, that accounts for just over 1/10 of the total employment in the United States. And only about 1/4 of that 1/10 is actual farm labor. The possibility of feeding a society with less and less human power was the single most crucial component in the event we call the Industrial Revolution. Large numbers of people moved from working in farming to working in factories. And it is because of that societal transformation that we have a Labor Day. That observance, which will be marked tomorrow, stems from a parade and public demonstration by a coalition of organized workers, largely factory workers, although other early unions participated as well, that was held in New York City in 1882. For just a little bit more on what led up to that and what followed after it, I'm going to read you the Black Slam poet Hakeem Bellany's 4-sentence description of the trajectory of labor in America across time. In the year of our Constitution, 1787, our country was already over 150 years into the practice of creating free and cheap laborers for life. And in 1786, printers in Philadelphia conducted the first successful strike for increased wages. Over 100 years later, in 1902, a former dressmaker and schoolteacher known simply as Mother Jones would be called the most dangerous woman in America. And over 100 years to now, we still have a long way to go in a country that democratically elects leaders who genuinely believe that underpaid teachers and their unions are the biggest threat to our future. Now, to rephrase that for clarity, since long before the official beginning of this country, there have been wealthy and powerful Americans trying to find sources of labor whom they could force to work for as little cost as possible. First, there were indentured servants from Europe who lived in a semi-permanent form of contractual serfdom. Then the exponentially larger number of human beings from Africa, captured and imported in the transatlantic slave trade. The self-organization of workers also has a long history here, and with it, the demonization of anyone promoting the radical idea that those on the lower rungs of the economic hierarchy deserve fair treatment, just compensation, and the right to live with dignity and comfort. This country, like most other leading global economies, has been deindustrializing for many decades now. Most of the jobs that we reflexively associate with labor and labor unions are no longer being done here. In part because that work is being done in other countries instead, places where the people who own and manage business interests have calculated that they can pay workers less with little or no risk of their organizing and agitating for improvements. But also because of automation. The amount of human work needed to run a factory has steadily decreased over time in a way that echoes the declining need for farm labor in centuries and decades previous. Today, the labor that makes the world around us possible is more varied than it was in previous generations. And that has helped to make solidarity among working people dramatically harder to build, as different types of work are pitted against each other. See, for example, the political targeting of teachers and other public sector workers, jobs often done by women. The undervaluing or complete devaluing of the types of work that women do in a society may, of course, be as old, if not older, than the very idea of intentionally planting crops in a field. So, in honor of Labor Day, at a time when what qualifies as good or real work is in dispute, and when has it ever not been, I want to offer some poems or fragments of poems about different sorts of work. The first is about the simple, potentially desperate necessity of having work to do in a society where basic necessities must be bought and paid for. It comes from Michigan's Bob Hickok, who earlier in his life worked on the periphery of the automotive industry. This is the second half or so of his poem about calling a man who had been laid off with an offer to now rehire him. I said, He could have his job back, and during the pause that followed, his whiskers scrubbed the mouthpiece clean, and his breath passed in and out in the tidal fashion popular with mammals until he broke through with the words, "How soon? Thank you, oh my God," which crossed his lips and drove through the wires on the backs of ions as one long word, as one hard prayer of relief meant to be heard by the sky. When he began to cry, I tried with the shape of my silence to say I understood, but each confession of fear and poverty was more awkward than what you learn in the shower. After he hung up, I went outside and I sat with one hand in the bower of the other. And I thought, if I turn my head to the left, it changes the song of the oriole. And if I give a job to one stomach, other folks are naked. And if tonight a steak sizzles in his kitchen, do the 7 other people staring at their phones hear? Money must be made in order to stay alive in this world of ours. But then there is so much work on which the world depends that no one gets paid for as badly as it needs doing. The uncompensated labor of child rearing, of cooking, cleaning, of all that goes into tending a home. There is nothing inherently biological about these types of work, but these labors have been assigned socially to women mostly, or sometimes entirely. Among large, organized groups of human beings, since well before this nation began, even since before that little story about Adam and Eve that we began with. The Dominican-American author, Rina P. Espaillat, speaks to the weight of that labor and the parallel burden of its nobility in her poem, Find Work. She writes, "My mother's mother, widowed very young of her first love and of that love's first fruit, moved through her father's farm, her country tongue and country heart anesthetized and mute with labor. So her kind was taught to do, find work, she would reply to every grief, and her one dictum, whether false or true, told heavy with her passionate belief. Widowed again, with children in her prime, she spoke so little it was hard to bear so much composure, such a truce with time spent in the lifelong practice of despair. But I recall her floors, scrubbed white as bone, her dishes, and how painfully they shone." There is a reason that the women and girls, most of them immigrants, who undertook the Lawrence, Massachusetts textile strike in 1912 came to be associated with the demand for bread and roses. Just compensation for labor requires at least 2 things: bread, the means to support oneself and one's family, the literal compensation, in other words, and roses, a fundamental respect for the work and the person who did it that allows someone to live with dignity in the society they are helping to sustain. Espaillat's grandmother's story is partially about the types of work that our economy compensates only in roses, only in pains to the virtue and importance of motherhood and wifery, and of how that noble work alone was cold comfort to a hard life. Martín Espada, the New Yorker poet and essayist, wrote his poem Alabanza in praise of Local 100. As he explained it, he wrote it for the 43 members of Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Local 100, a union, at the windows on the World Restaurant, who lost their lives in the attack on the World Trade Center. In this one stanza, he paints a picture of the profoundly human concerns of two of those workers. Alabanza, by the way, is the Spanish word meaning praise. Alabanza, praise the dish dog, the dishwasher who worked that morning because another dishwasher could not stop coughing, or because he needed overtime to pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs. Alabanza, praise the waitress who heard the radio in the kitchen and sang to herself about a man gone. Alabanza. Reading that one reminded me of the professor of mine in college who canceled class in mid-September 2001 and explained to me that he was grieving the loss of his best friend who had been the manager of the Windows on the World restaurant. So in honor of that professor, here is a poem by another one about the precarious circumstances of their field. This is Brian Fanelli's Adjunct Blues. My dinged-up Honda sputters to the next school, next class, Freshman Comp 101, where students in sweats yawn away my 8 a.m. lecture, and the new recruit quarterback slouches at his seat, texts while his girlfriend slides her heels up his legs, tap, tap, tapping her pencil all class. My dinged-up Honda sputters to the next school, next office, where the copier beeps and jams, and I imagine yanking out its wired guts, spilling coffee on its circuits, clapping as it smokes and steams. My dinged-up Honda sputters to the next school, next community clinic, for a free flu shot and medicine to ease my chronic cough. The secretary eyes my ironed thrift store suit and tie and says, "You sure you need this service?" My dinged-up Honda sputters to the next school, next class, where I ghost through hallways, a blur to full-time faculty. This time, I leave all lights on after 10 p.m., go home to red ink my last stack of exams. The work on which our world depends is done by many different people in many different sorts of ways. While it has gotten unquestionably harder or even impossible for some of us just to be workers in the last 50 years, the overall story is that it has gotten harder for most of us together. The overall increase in wealth in this country in that half-century time period has been overwhelmingly concentrated in the top 1% of households. And even then, the vast majority of those gains have been to the top 1% of that 1%. This Labor Day, and every single day after, we should remember that just compensation for work requires both bread and roses. And I also hope that we will come to remember the biblical lesson that I began with. Work needed and worth doing is noble. Some few of us are lucky enough to like the work that we do, or to work more out of choice than out of necessity. But most people do not share that experience. And as one of the few lucky ones who likes his job, it makes me all the more appreciative of people doing work that I would not want to do. But the plain message in Genesis is, it seems to me, that work, at least the necessity of having to work, not having a choice, needing to do it to survive, is a curse. The technological advancements of the last 300 years or so have done a spectacular job of reducing the need for human labor in order to create basic sustenance for humankind. But especially in the last half century, the benefits of all those changes have not been realized even remotely equally across the human family. Yet, the highest goal of our society, the life that we make together for ourselves and for each other, ought not to be to benefit the right kinds of work and disparage the wrong. It should be instead to create a world free of work itself, or at least where work is a less pressing, less demanding, less crushingly essential thing for all of our survival. We live in a world with a greater excess of resources than at any other known time in human history. The ultimate benefit of such a society should not be extraordinary wealth for a few. It should be to provide the many with that little taste of paradise lost, the simple pleasure and comfort of rest.
I invite you into this time of giving and receiving, where we give freely and generously to this offering, which supports the ongoing work of this community. There are multiple ways to share your gifts this morning. Baskets now being passed here in the auditorium for cash or checks, or you can donate directly from your website, from this website, fusmadison.org. And you'll see on the screen our text to give information. We thank you for your generosity and for your faith in this life that we create together.
Each week we gather, carrying in our hearts the joys and the losses of our days. We bring them here and share them, knowing they are held gently in care, in support, and in love. We light a candle of profound grief for Harper Moisky and Fletcher Merkel, the two children killed, as well as those injured in the Annunciation Catholic Church school shooting in Minneapolis this week. May our nation one day be free of this epidemic of senseless violence, which seems very nearly unique to us. One of us asks that we light a candle for prayers on behalf of the family of their granddaughter's classmate, a mother, father, and sibling who all died last week, 2 by murder and 1 by suicide. From the place where there are no words, we lament such tragedy. We light a candle for new school years beginning in this season. We ask blessings of patience and strength for the teachers and aides, wish good learning and growing for the students, and hope for the safety of each and all. We light a candle of hope and healing for Shotzi, mother of Tuyug, as she waits to hear on whether or not major surgery will be needed. We wish for her ease and comfort and a good health outcome. And we light a candle for all that lives in our hearts, the joys, the losses, the sorrow and celebration, and for the love that remains through it all. I invite you now to turn with me both inward and outward as we join together in a prayer of questions. How precious is the gift of this hour of life upon the earth? How great is the privilege of our own beating hearts, the powerful pulsing of blood in the veins, the sacrament of air breathed into our lungs and out again transformed. How glorious is our opportunity to live on this planet and to be a part of it. Why do we then, the children of this blessed sphere, entertain the illusion of our separateness? Why do we hoard what we do not need, be it wealth, or bread, or understanding, or kindness? Why are we all not yet free? Where is there a place in our world which is sacred to no one? Where is there a person on this planet who has not been sanctified by the love of another? Where is the wonder within our species for the holiness of all that we are and all that we are surrounded by? When shall true peace, which is not the absence of tension but the presence of justice, settle over our countries and cities and households and hearts? When will the grief which follows violence in all of its guises be ended? When shall the nations of the earth study war no more? What then is to be done? What courageous examples and loving role models may we call to mind in choosing how to spend our precious days? What worthy work is there for us on this beautiful and imperfect world, other than to cherish and protect it and each other? Who has ever done this work except for us and the countless others who were or are alike to us in spirit? Who are you being called to become by this precious and unique moment in the life of the universe? Who could I ever wish to be other than the truest and most loving version of myself? Amen. Now, friends, I invite you to rise one more time in body and or spirit. Let's sing our closing hymn together, number 128, in your silver and gray hymnals, For All That Is Our Life, 128.
Our
hearts and hands and minds renewed to the world that is waiting for you. Go out to that world to bring your gentle touch to those in pain. Go out to feed and house those in need. Go out to speak truth to those with power. Go out with courage to do the work which calls you. Go out now with your passion and faith to change the world. Blessed be. Go in peace, and please be at rest for the postlude.